Without Ukraine cannot be Russia as an empire. That Putin thought is a matter of a couple of days, some more sanctions, but that's about. Russia can live with that. Because he's out of the touch of the reality, Putin will disappear from having the power in Russia. Hi, I'm Markku Wilenius, and I'm gonna talk to you about what I think will happen with Russian invasion to Ukraine. My prediction is that Russian forces will retreat from Ukraine and Putin will disappear from having the power in Russia. Why do you think that I'm saying this? I want to explain to you how futurists think this kind of a surprising event that has taken all the world by the surprise. Now, obviously, we need to go a little bit back first. We need to understand that for Putin, this is about building back the empire. The Soviet empire used to be the empire that some of the Tsars were able to create, Peter the Great, even the Terrible. So he wants to be among those who have been able to build and rebuild back the empire called Russia, and that includes Ukraine. And that Ukraine is a quintessential part of his grand scheme. Without Ukraine, there cannot be Russia as an empire. But why I'm thinking that this game that he's been playing, he's gonna lose it in a terrible way. That is based on what the futurists use very often, which is systemic thinking. Systems, I need to explain first how the system things work. Systems basically have three parts. It has direction, it has the elements, and it has the interaction and the feedback loops. When you look at the direction, I already told you that direction of the current Putin's regime is to build back the empire. Everything has been geared towards that goal. Anything, the way that he's manipulating, the way that he's running the country, the way of the invasion, not only this one, but also the others that he did formerly in Syria, in Georgia, Chechnya, and so forth. It's all the part of this big game. This direction has now some fatal consequences because he is so much connected to the past that he thinks that he can actually rebuild this past, but there is no way Russia can gain back this type of empire. The two other parts of this system are the elements. The elements in this case of a Russian system. So there is a Putin, there are oligarchs, there is a political and business elite, and there are people. Putin has been able to create a kleptocracy. Kleptocracy means that you have a system where everybody is stealing something out of the system. In this case, it's particularly Putin himself, but also increasingly everybody else, because that's the way you make a living, sometimes a good living. And in case of the Russia, having this wealth that comes from the fossil fuels, there has been a lot to steal from. This has been going on more than 20 years. He has very skillfully built this kind of a system where everybody is ultimately obedient to him. The oligarchs are ultimately obedient to Putin so that they can run their businesses, but they don't touch the politics. The political elite is obedient to Putin because they cannot do any otherwise. There is no other force in the politics. And the folks, the people, want to believe that Putin is a great leader, strong leader, that bring back the heydays of the Russian empire, one way or another. And they are praising Putin because he seemed to have a lot of effort to do that for the people. Now we need to understand that, of course, for the Putin, it's all about himself. He doesn't care about the people. He doesn't care about the oligarchs. He just cares about himself and his own future. But he has built this kind of a skillful system to take those other parts, those other elements of the systems into him. And that has created this type of the feedback loop where everybody is kind of gaining and stealing out of that who are important players. Most of the people, of course, most of the elements inside, or people inside the element, so to say, are not gaining anything from that. That's why the average living standard has not been increasing in Russia, in spite of this amazing amount of the wealth that has been created. But this is now been running for more than 20 years. And now we come to the culmination point. The system that has been built has this type of the feedback loops that we call them negative feedback. So it actually builds system weaker. And from the systemic perspective, it is important that there are positive feedback loops, but that increasing and strengthening the system. But this has not been the case of this Russian system. So it's actually a very weak system because nobody takes care of the whole. Everybody is just thinking of their own good within that system. And that is why it's running out of the gas, so to say. It's running into the situation when it's becoming a weaker and weaker. And now with the Russian invasion into the Ukraine, that Putin thought that it's a matter of a couple of days, they come back to Russia as a winner, and his popularity will even increase from where it is now, and everybody is happy except a couple of Ukrainians and except some of the West that may put some more sanctions, but that's about it. Russia can live with that. That was his thought. Now, because he's out of the touch of the reality, he couldn't think of the consequences of his own action, and he couldn't think that his system is actually so weak as it is, that everybody is stealing from the system. And the moment the systems gets threatened, as it is now, in case, not only because of the Ukraine, but because of the Western sanctions, because of all the bad will that Putin has created by executing massacres there in the Ukraine, and kind of having this huge attention by the world that how can anybody do this in our center. This further increases the weakness of the system. First of all, there are the oligarchs, and they see that because of these heavy sanctions that most of the world, not all, but most of the world has put to Russia, is actually a crash course for the Russian economy. The economy will by and large default. It's gonna grow so weak, and that's because the economy by and large has been resting mostly on the fossil fuels, export of the fossil fuels. And because it's so weak, because it doesn't have the leverage, it doesn't have a larger portfolio of different businesses there, it's gonna be very easy to get into the situation where the whole economy gets so weak that it ultimately crashes. The second thing is that what happens then? Well, the oligarchs obviously need to start to think about, can they still obey Putin and his orders, even if it seemingly takes them to the situation where their businesses will not flourish anymore. To the contrary, they will crash. Obviously, they will not allow this to happen in the end, and we have seen already the first signs of it. The second is the political elite. Also politically, Russia is now being mostly excluded from the other part of the world. Okay, there is still China that is playing the same part because they see the opportunity to have a stronger hold of the Russia. So they are still kind of saying that yes, we still like to collaborate with Russia. But they cannot do that alone. I mean, for Russia, it's not enough that they have a support of the China. They have to have a support for the rest of the world. There needs to be a collaboration, political and economic collaboration. If that doesn't happen, Russia's economy in its current state, it's not gonna hold. Now, political elite will come to understand it, and they probably have already started to look for the alternatives. We don't know who that alternative is, but at some point that will also become apparent that the political elite does not want this to continue. The last part of the system is, of course, the element is the people. Now, this far the people have been very favorable for Putin because because of the manipulation of the media, they strongly believe that this has just a friendly kind of a interference to Ukraine, who had been invaded by the Nazis before that and taken the kind of building the Nazi government in Ukraine. And Russians just as friends, they go over to Ukraine and change the government and come back. That is by and large the story that has been told. And of course we know this is a totally untrue story based on what I have been saying earlier. Now, people in this world ultimately will get to know what the real truth is behind. It just takes more time because there is all this camouflage, what the official media is producing for the Russian people. But we are living in the world today where we have a lot of other accesses to the actual information. So slowly but surely also Russian people will start to understand that this Putin guy is not really working for them. He's working for himself, for his own good. He doesn't think about the good of the Russian people. And then what happens inevitably, and this is not the first time, there's going to be much more protest coming from the people that start to understand that Putin is essentially destroying their own country. From the systemic perspective, we might say that when the tipping point comes, and what we also call the bifurcation point, then the system alters its state. Something else, something totally different will appear. And we have a lot of these signs now that are building the way for that tipping point. When the tipping point comes, the system changes very radically and changes also in the way that, in this case, the Russia behaves will change also very much dramatically. Future is, of course, always something different than we think because we don't know all the details. But by and large, I see this type of the direction for this Russian invasion and for the future of the Putin's regime. And let's see what happens.